I was rinsing coffee cups when my daughter's voice, my little girl who once braided my hair with pink ribbons and patience, cut the kitchen in half. "Either serve my husband," Emily said, every syllable placed like a blade on a dinner plate, "or leave." For a second, I thought she was practicing lines for a community theater audition. But Daniel didn't laugh. He leaned against the marble island I'd paid for, scrolling his phone like a king bored by the subject of taxes, and nodded without looking up. The noon sun threw squares of light across the floor, turning everything into neat geometry. There was nothing neat about the way my chest tightened. "Sweetheart," I said, setting the mug down so gently you'd think it might shatter if I breathed on it. "What did you say?" Emily's chin trembled, so slight an earthquake it would barely register on a gauge, but I felt it in my bones. "You heard me, Dad." Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, as if to ask if she'd done it right. "He's the head of this house now. If you're going to stay, you'll respect his rules." Rules? I looked at the refrigerator covered in my granddaughter's drawings, the paper hearts I'd pretended were modern art, the grocery list I'd written that morning: bread, eggs, olive oil, mundane proof that I lived here, cooked here, cared here. I remembered a different kitchen 3 months earlier, a different kind of tremor when grief threw dishes and syllables at us after the funeral. Emily had taken my hand then and promised, no one would come between us. We'd cried into the same dish towel. I turned to Daniel. "What rules?" He finally met my eyes, the corners of his mouth lifting in a smile he probably used in meetings to make worse news sound like a discount. "Nothing unreasonable, sir. You're retired. It's time to let us handle things." He gestured with his phone, casual as a weather report. "I'll need the house passwords, the safe key, and it would be best if you ran purchases by me. And meals. Emily needs more help. A man your age knows his way around a pan. It's the least you can do." Something in me, something old and obedient, stood to attention out of habit. I've been the family fixer since I was 22. I can cook a 10-minute omelet and a 30-year plan. I can be useful. I can be needed. But the way Daniel said, "a man your age," like an expiration date stamped across my forehead, made the room tilt. "Dad," Emily said, softer now, walking that narrow bridge between pleading and betrayal, "please don't make this harder. Daniel just wants order. Since Mom—" She stopped, as if the word might break her teeth. She swallowed. "We need stability." Stability I could give, subservience I could not. I dried my hands on the towel and folded it into a neat square on the counter. "I won't be spoken to like staff in a house I built, sweetheart." Daniel's smile thinned. "Then perhaps it's healthier if you take some space, temporarily." He looked at the clock like a judge glancing at a docket. "Today." A small sound, metal against porcelain, came from Emily's hand. Her wedding band had tapped the rim of a glass. She used to do that as a little girl when she was afraid of the dark. Tap, 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 to make sure I was still there. I felt the ghost of that rhythm in my ribs. I could have argued. I could have exploded. The words lined up at the back of my throat like firefighters ready to sprint into a burning building. But my father taught me something that saved more than one business deal and more than one heart. Sometimes the loudest thing a man can do is be quiet. So I smiled. I crossed the kitchen, pulled my old suitcase from the pantry, and set it on the table. Its leather was scuffed from family vacations and hospital overnights and the last trip I took with my wife when the doctors said yes to sunlight and no to hope. I packed as if I were leaving for a 2-day conference. Shirts, socks, the frame photo of Emily at 16, grinning through a face full of braces. She'd refused to smile for months after they were put on, then one day burst into the kitchen and announced she didn't care what anyone thought. That girl could stare down storms. "Where will you go?" Emily asked, voice small, voice familiar, voice mine. "I'll start with a motel," I said, zipping the suitcase. "I'll be fine." Daniel stepped aside like a courteous doorman. "Good choice." At the front door, I paused and looked back. "You'll need bread, eggs, and olive oil," I said, nodding at the list. "And the smoke alarm battery is low. It chirps at 3 a.m. He waved a dismissive hand. "We'll manage." Emily pressed her lips together. For a fragment of a second, I thought she might run to me, might tear paper and promises and pride, and bury her face in my chest the way she did the night she broke up with her first boyfriend. Instead, she said, "Call me when you get there." Outside, the air was spring and sharp. I placed the suitcase in the trunk like a delicate machine. The house stood behind me, confident in its brick and glass, and I realized houses don't keep promises. People do. I slid into the driver's seat and rested my hands on the wheel. My fingers left damp crescents of dishwater on the leather. Across the street, the mail carrier tucked envelopes into our box. He waved. Habit made me wave back. Habit also made me open the lid before I drove away. Bills, a coupon flyer, a pale envelope from the county assessor's office. I glanced at the return address, meaning to toss it onto the passenger seat with the rest of my small defeats. That's when I saw a name beneath ours, printed in neat bureaucratic font. Daniel Whitaker, secondary owner. My heart didn't race. It narrowed, like a camera lens focusing on a single point of light. I folded the envelope and slid it into my jacket pocket, then started the engine. If they wanted me gone, I would go, quietly, politely, the way I've always done everything that mattered. But I have never left a problem unsolved. The county envelope looked routine, but Daniel's name sitting under mine made my stomach turn, and it was the first thread I'd pull until the whole thing came apart. I used to measure time in invoices, payroll runs, and the hum of compressors on a job site at dawn. After my wife got sick, time learned a different language. It spoke in IV pumps and the soft squeak of rubber soles on hospital floors. In the way a clock seems louder when you're waiting for a doctor to tell you whether hope is reasonable or just cruel. Emily was 16 when the oncologist said the word we pretended we didn't hear. She wore her varsity sweater, navy with white stripes, though the air conditioning in the oncology wing never seemed to bother her. She held her mother's hand with the stubborn tenderness of a child who has decided the rules no longer apply. I stood on the other side of the bed, a man who could lift beams and pour concrete, but could not keep a woman's blood counts from dropping. That night, when the morphine did its kindest work and my wife finally slept without pain, Emily touched my sleeve. We stepped into the family room, where the vending machines blinked like small, patient lighthouses. She looked older in that strange fluorescent light, jaw set, eyes glassy with a determination I recognized from the mirror on mornings I didn't think I could keep the business afloat. "Dad," she said, voice shaking but steady, "it's just us now." I opened my mouth to protest. Your mother is sleeping, not leaving, but Emily barreled forward. "I won't abandon you the way Mom's family did," she whispered, as if saying their failure out loud could scare it back into the shadows. "I promise, I'll always protect you. You'll never be alone. There are moments that brand themselves on a life. First mortgage approval, first home key, the day a foreman you trust quits and takes 2 crews with him. And then there's the moment your daughter, still soft with childhood but carrying herself like a soldier, vows to be your harbor when the map dissolves. I nodded because there was nothing else to do, and because her promise plugged a hole in me I hadn't admitted was there. I kissed her hair. It smelled like apple shampoo and hospital soap. We buried my wife on a Tuesday. The funeral home recommended Tuesdays, less crowded, as if grief needed a reservation. Emily squeezed my hand so hard my fingers tingled, and when people hugged us in the receiving line, she leaned into me as if we were a single pillar holding up the roof of a collapsing church. After the casseroles stopped arriving and the house resumed its natural sound, pipes, wind, the late-night groan of a settling frame, Emily and I learned to orbit each other in a way that didn't make the empty chair the loudest thing in the room. We cooked together. I taught her my wife's red sauce, the one that uses 3 cloves of garlic if we're being civilized and 5 if we're honest. She taught me how to like the same music for more than one song. We made a new language out of dishes and playlists and silence that didn't hurt. Work became my scaffolding. I threw myself into it not to escape, but to keep the promises I'd made to both of them. 70-hour weeks weren't unusual. 80-hour weeks felt like coming home to an old version of myself. I grew the company one careful bit at a time, said yes to the right jobs and no to the ones that smelled like fast money and slow ruin. When the recession flirted with taking us under, I mortgaged this house, the house where Emily grew up measuring herself against doorframe pencil marks to make payroll. We made it through. We always did. When Emily fell in love with Daniel, I tried to see him through her eyes. She glowed when she said his name. He knew which fork to use at charity dinners and how to charm a room without being the one people remembered in the photos. He spoke fluent future, promotions coming, investments maturing, a 4-bedroom starter home because 3 felt like surrender. He treated my daughter like she was a prize he had the taste to choose. I told myself that could be a kind of love. I paid for their wedding because I wanted them to start life with a clean ledger. When she walked down the aisle, veil pinned with her mother's hair combs, my lungs forgot how to be anything but grateful. At the reception, Daniel clinked his glass and thanked our families for their support. Eyes wet at the corners, and I took that as a sign of decency instead of rehearsal. People cheered. I cheered. Emily threw her head back and laughed, and the room felt like light. Their first house needed a down payment that made my accountant grunt. I wrote the check anyway. I pictured grandkids crawling across those floors, Thanksgiving in that kitchen, a future with the edges rounded by routine and kindness. The loan documents listed Emily first, a small detail I requested, and Daniel pretended not to notice. "Of course," he'd said, "whatever makes everyone comfortable." He had that talent I admired and now resent. Letting a sentence lay there, perfectly harmless, until you realized it had been built to hold weight later. There were warning signs, I see that now. The way he'd steer conversations back to money, to efficiency, to optimizing household structures. The afternoon he offered to streamline my bill pay because those portals are needlessly complex for older eyes. The night he poured me an extra bourbon and asked, easy as the weather, whether I had a comprehensive plan for end-of-life asset allocation. I laughed it off, proud of my estate binder with its tabs and my lawyer's business card clipped to the inside cover. He smiled approvingly, like a teacher giving partial credit. But Emily, she was the counterweight to my doubt. She'd slip her hand into my elbow as we crossed parking lots. She'd call on Tuesdays just to tell me a joke she knew wouldn't land. She'd come by on Saturdays with croissants and a list of things she needed my drill for. And when she left, she'd kiss my cheek and say, "Love you, Dad." The words filled the house like heat. I believed her because I needed to, and because she had never given me a reason not to. I believed both of us could outlove the pain. I believed in the promise made under fluorescent lights. And then, months later, standing in her kitchen, I heard her choose Daniel's order over my dignity, and all that believing turned into something heavy I had to carry out to the car. Grief has a way of rewinding a life to the exact frame where you thought you were safe. That night, in the motel off Route 7, I opened the suitcase and found the photo of Emily, with braces sliding against the edge of a manila folder. I hadn't packed a manila folder. It was labeled in my wife's steady hand, house, deed, and beneficiaries. I'd always kept those papers in the office safe. So, how did this folder end up in my suitcase? A slow, cold wave moved through me as I realized the folder wasn't where it should be. And if someone had been moving my most important papers, then the promise Emily made in that hospital room might be the only thing that kept me from seeing what was happening right in my own home. The first time Daniel tried to push me from the helm, it was a Sunday dressed up like a family commercial. Pancakes, sunlight, my granddaughter's syrup fingerprints on my forearm. I stood at the stove flipping batter the way my wife taught me. Wait for the bubbles, then turn with confidence. And Daniel unfolded a trifold spreadsheet on the counter like a magician about to pull a rabbit out of a budget. "Household operations," he said lightly, tapping cells that were color-coded, within an inch of their lives. "If we streamline responsibilities, we'll reduce friction, fewer misunderstandings." Emily reached past him for plates. "Daniel, not now." "It'll only take a minute," he said. "Your dad and I can divide tasks. He's great with repairs. I'll handle admin, passwords, utilities, bill pay. He can step back and enjoy retirement." I slid a pancake onto my granddaughter's plate and watched her sprinkle it with powdered sugar until it snowed. Step back. That was the kind of phrase I respected at a job site, when a crane arcs overhead and you value your life. But in my own kitchen it tasted off, like milk just barely turned. "I'm happy to pay the bills," I said, handing Emily a plate. "Been doing it a few decades." Daniel smiled the way people smile during customer service calls. "Of course, sir, but online systems are tricky. I can take that off your hands." Emily set the plates down with a little more gravity than necessary. "Daniel, this is my father's house," she said, not raising her voice but sharpening it. "He earned it. He decides how things run here." It shouldn't have made my heart catch the way it did, hearing her say it, but grief had me wired funny. Affirmation hit like oxygen. I kept my face neutral, flipped another pancake, and pretended I wasn't cataloging this moment to replay later when the house was quiet. Daniel's palms lifted in surrender. I just want what's best for the family. He turned a sheet around so it faced me. See, I even budgeted for your weekend fishing trips. You deserve them. If manipulation had a scent, it would be lavender and printer ink. Still, Emily's defense was a warm hand at my back. She wiped syrup off my arm with a dish towel and bumped my shoulder, the way she used to when she wanted the last piece of bacon. "We've got this, Dad," she murmured. "You cook. I'll handle everything else." We ate at the table my wife and I bought in a year we couldn't really afford it. Daniel kept returning to his favorite word, optimize, the way some men return to a favorite chair. He asked casual questions with careful edges. "Do you have a medical directive, sir? Just in case." "Yes." "Where do you keep it? Someone should know." "In a safe place," I said, taking a sip of coffee. That someone being me. He laughed softly. "Fair enough." After breakfast, Emily and I tackled the clogged hall bath, the kind of job that used to annoy me and lately felt like therapy. She held the flashlight while I loosened a stubborn slip nut, and we laughed when a little geyser sprayed my shirt. "Mom would say we're doing it wrong," she said, eyes bright. "Your mother would file a complaint with the water department and win," I replied, and we both smiled at the truth of it. In the hallway, Daniel drifted from frame to frame, studying family photos as if there were test questions later. He paused at the one of Emily at 16, braces catching the flash, and then moved on to our wedding picture. His finger traced the edge of the glass, not quite touching. Something about the motion bothered me. It took me a second to name it. He was getting to know the house like a person gets to know a new phone, where the buttons are, what swipes unlock what. When we finished, Emily hugged me from the side, damp hair sticking to her temple. "You sure you don't want help with online stuff?" she asked. "He can be pushy, but he's trying." "I know," I said, because I wanted to believe she believed that. "We'll take it slow." She kissed my cheek. "Thank you." That evening, I found Daniel in the garage staring at the locked cabinet where I keep power tools and documents that don't like humidity. The cabinet and the safe share a habit. They both complain if strangers jostle them. He had both hands in his pockets, bent slightly at the waist like a curator. "Looking for something?" I asked. He jumped, just a flicker, then turned with a hospitable grin. "Just admiring your organization. Impressive." "Some of those boxes bite," I said. "Careful where you reach." "Noted." He peered over my shoulder toward the door to the backyard. "We should get the locks rekeyed soon. Standard best practice." "We rekeyed after the funeral," I said, and again when the contractor finished the patio. "Great," he said. "No such thing as being too careful." After he went inside, I stood in the garage and listened to the house breathe. The new deadbolt clicked cleanly when I tested it. The cabinet's padlock sat heavy and familiar in my palm before I returned it to the latch. I told myself the knot between my shoulders was age. I told myself a lot of things that month. 2 days later, Emily brought croissants and the week's remaining patience. We went through the mail together, catalogs, a water bill, a notice from the bank about enhanced online security features. She asked if I'd gotten the email too. I hadn't. She pulled it up on her phone and read aloud the instructions about two-factor authentication. "Daniel says we should centralize access," she said, almost apologetically, "in case anything happens." I watched the small muscle jump in her jaw, the one that always shows up when she's repeating someone else's lines. "In case anything happens," I echoed. "To whom?" She exhaled. "Oh, Dad." "I'm fine, Em." "I know," she said quickly, stepping forward to squeeze my forearm. "I know." And for a day or two, I let the warmth of her defense push back the draft coming under the door. That weekend, while I was on the ladder clearing the gutters, Daniel stepped outside and shaded his eyes. "Want me to take over?" he called up. "I've got it," I said. "Careful," he added, cheerful as a warning label. "A fall at your age can be permanent." The scoop paused in my hand. I looked down at him, sunglasses reflecting a warped version of me. I thought about the spreadsheet, the locks, the bank notice, the casually invasive questions. I thought about Emily's voice defending me like a bright flare, and how quickly flares burn out. Leaves shifted in the gutter, exposing a glint of metal, a key wedged under damp muck, not one of mine, too new, too smooth. I eased it free and turned it in my palm. It was stamped with a letter I didn't recognize. When I looked down again, Daniel was already heading back inside, whistling something upbeat that didn't match the weather. My heart started to drum as I realized the key didn't belong to me, which meant someone had been unlocking parts of my life I hadn't consented to, and I was the only one who didn't know what doors were already open. If grief is fog, manipulation is the sign that looks clear until you're already down the wrong exit. It started small, like everything that turns out to be enormous. "Your dad seems tired lately," Daniel would say, pouring Emily more wine at dinner. "He missed the turn to Elm Street twice this week." I hadn't missed the turn. I'd avoided the construction that backed traffic up for an hour. But by the time I opened my mouth, his concern had already wrapped itself around her shoulders like a gentleman's coat. "Maybe we should help him with the online stuff," he offered, palms up, harmless, "so he can enjoy things." Enjoy things. The phrase sounded like a pamphlet handed to me at the entrance of a retirement home. They began helping. The Wi-Fi name changed from the one my wife picked, long and silly, to something sterile that sounded like a router brand. The TV remote learned new tricks and forgot old ones. When the bank rolled out enhanced security, Emily set up an authenticator app, just in case. "Text me if it gives you trouble, Dad," she said, sweet as she's always been. When the code requests started arriving on her phone at midnight, she'd text me, "Are you checking the account now?" I wasn't. Someone was. I told myself it was the learning curve of a modern house. Still, my tools began migrating. The drill I always kept on the second shelf appeared on the fourth. The spare safe key, hidden for 20 years in a place my wife and I joked would outlast nuclear winter, went missing, then turned up in a drawer that had no business holding anything valuable. A kindness turned inside out. "We reorganized the garage, so it's easier for you." Easier for whom? At breakfast, Daniel would say, "He seems a little forgetful," as if I weren't sitting there buttering toast. "Nothing alarming, normal aging." "I'm right here," I'd say, keeping my voice even. "Of course," he'd answer, with a sympathetic smile. "We're all on the same team." And then the little tests began, the ones you don't notice until you're failing them. He'd move the car keys from the hook to a bowl and watch how long it took me to find them. He'd reschedule a doctor's appointment and tell me last minute to see if I'd remember. He'd take a picture of the refrigerator calendar and then ask me about dates as if we were playing trivia. Once he swapped the salt and sugar in unmarked jars. When the sauce tasted wrong and I frowned, he said quietly, "He used to make this perfectly." Emily didn't see the pattern because she loved him, or because she loved the version of him he performed for her. When I stepped aside in the kitchen so he could show me a more efficient way to dice onions, she smiled like a woman grateful for help. I understood. For years she watched me carry weight without complaint. The sight of someone else lifting must have looked like a blessing. "What if something happens to you?" Daniel said one afternoon, kneading the question like dough. "We should have durable power of attorney ready to go. It's just paperwork." "I already have the necessary documents," I said, "filed with my attorney." He tilted his head. "But are they current?" "Current enough to outlast fads," I said, and his smile tightened for a heartbeat before it smoothed again. He worked on my routines the way a contractor works a wall. Tap, listen, map the hollows. He learned when I shop, when I nap, when I take the long route to the lake, because it reminds me of the road my wife loved. He asked about my pills, the dosage, the little blue organizer I stubbornly refused to buy, because I'm not a man who needs Monday printed on plastic to know where he is in a week. 2 days later, Emily arrived with a pillbox that clicked like a metronome. "Humor me," she said, kissing my cheek. I did, because once you've watched your family lose something you can never return, you don't reject simple help just because pride flares. But pride is not what flared. Instinct did. The key I'd found in the gutter weighed on my pocket like a borrowed truth. Late one night, with the house breathing its even, unsuspecting breath, I took it to the garage. The padlock on the document cabinet was a small old friend. We'd had an understanding for decades. I slid the new key in, not expecting it to turn. It did. Smooth, intimate, practiced. A key doesn't fit that well by accident. Inside, the hanging folders stood in marching order. One sleeve, house, deed, and beneficiaries, was empty except for a paperclip still clinging to the tab. The folder itself was in my suitcase at the motel. Someone had moved it before I left, then tidied the evidence until the cabinet looked untouched. If you never opened it, you would never know anything had moved. On the workbench, I found a single hair, Emily's, caught on the hinge. My daughter hates the garage, the smell, the dust. If she'd been in here, she hadn't come alone. I closed the cabinet quietly, heart thrumming, not with panic, but with a cold, organizing calm. I took a thin strip of painter's tape and ran it across the seam where lock meets metal, barely visible in the dim light, the way a hotel maid might test a minibar. If it broke, I would know. I dusted the padlock with the chalk from my granddaughter's bucket and took a photo with the timestamp on. Evidence of nothing yet, but I've built fortunes out of nothing before. In the morning, the house woke up gentle. My granddaughter toddled in with a banana and a battered stuffed dog. She climbed into my lap and arranged the dog between us like a treaty. "Mommy says we're going to the big store," she announced. "Danny says we need special paper." "What kind of paper?" I asked, smoothing her hair. She grinned, proud to remember. "The kind with stamps, for grown-ups." Notary. The word didn't come from her. It landed in my head like a dropped wrench. Stamps, signatures, special paper. I looked past her toward the hallway where Emily and Daniel were whispering, their voices low and fast. When they emerged, Daniel's hand rested at the small of her back like a claim. "We have errands," Emily said. "Back by lunch." "Which errand first?" I asked lightly. Daniel smiled. "Bank, then the county office. Dry cleaning if we're lucky." "Leave me your mail key," I said, holding out my hand. An old habit of theirs when schedules were tight. He hesitated for half a second. No one would notice unless they were measuring time like I'd learned to, then dropped the key into my palm. When the door closed, I opened my phone and scrolled. The county assessor's notice was still in my pocket from the day I left. Daniel's name under mine, secondary owner, and now a trip to the bank, a notary, and special paper with stamps. I set the tiny hair back on the cabinet hinge like a tripwire and watched the clock. If they were putting ink to anything today, I needed to know what. And I needed to decide whether the next words out of my mouth would be a question or a record. A cold certainty spread through me. They weren't just helping. They were preparing something that required stamps and a witness. And if I didn't catch it before the ink dried, I might be watching my own signature undo my life. I've always prided myself on being observant. Years in my career taught me to read the subtlest changes in people, the twitch of an eye, a hesitation in their tone. But that night at dinner, when my daughter slid the plate in front of me, I noticed something different in her. It wasn't the food. It was her eyes. They darted quickly toward her husband before meeting mine. That silent exchange told me more than words ever could. "Dad," she began, her voice clipped but trying to sound casual. "From now on, things will be different." I set my fork down slowly, bracing myself. "Different how?" I asked, though my gut already churned with unease. Her husband leaned back in his chair, smirking with that lazy confidence that always rubbed me the wrong way. "What my wife means," he said smoothly, "is that you've had it easy here. But you're still strong, still capable. From now on, you'll earn your place. A little help around the house, maybe handling errands for us. Think of it as giving back." The words landed like blows. My daughter looked at me then, her expression hard, rehearsed. "Either you support us the way we need, or you leave." For a moment, the room spun. I'd raised this girl. I'd sacrificed sleep, comfort, and years of my life to give her everything I could. And now, with no hesitation, she was giving me an ultimatum. I heard my own voice, steady but tight, echoing the phrases I never thought I'd have to use against my own child. "I trusted you with my entire life, and this is how you repay that trust?" Her face hardened further, and her husband chuckled under his breath. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "You'll still have a roof over your head, but you follow our rules now. Family needs to adapt." I wanted to believe I'd misheard, that my daughter hadn't just reduced me to some servant in my own home. But the silence in the room was heavy, and the truth was undeniable. I tried to appeal to her heart. "I worked myself to the bone so you'd never have to know struggle. How can you ask me to bow to him like this?" She shifted uncomfortably but didn't look away. "Dad, times have changed. Eric provides for us. It's only fair you respect that." Respect. That word cut deeper than any blade. Eric smirked wider, leaning closer across the table. "Face it, old man. Your era is over. You either play by our rules or pack your bags." For the first time in years, my hands trembled. Not from age, but from rage held back by sheer will. My pulse hammered in my chest, and I realized something chilling. My daughter had chosen him over me. The meal sat untouched as I rose from my chair. My voice was calm, but I could feel the steel sharpening beneath it. "They mistake my kindness for weakness," I said quietly. "But they'll learn the difference." Neither of them responded. They just watched me, certain they had won. But inside, something shifted. A seed had been planted, one that would grow into something they couldn't control. And in that moment, as I left the table, my heart started racing. Because I realized this ultimatum wasn't just about obedience. It meant something darker, that if they could demand this of me now, there was no telling how far they'd go tomorrow. My heart started racing when I realized this was just the beginning, and if I didn't act soon, they would strip me of everything I had left. Driving away, I noticed a property tax notice with Daniel's name listed as secondary owner. Later that night, what I discovered in my late wife's jewelry box would reveal this went deeper than I ever imagined. The motel room smelled like lemon cleaner and someone else's worries. I set my suitcase on the bedspread and pulled the zipper like I was unsealing a vault. Shirts, socks, the framed photo of Emily grinning in her braces. And at the bottom, because habit is a stubborn thing, the small velvet jewelry box I'd taken from my wife's dresser the day we packed for hospice. I'd kept it close ever since, like a relic that could still radiate her steadiness. I wasn't looking for sentiment. I was looking for cash for a short-term apartment deposit, and maybe her wedding band, the thin gold circle that had outlasted every rough year. I pressed the tiny hinge. The lid lifted with a sigh. On top lay the ring in its pale groove. Beneath it, folded to the size of a matchbook, something crisp and yellowed with our family history. A page torn from a spiral-bound notebook. I knew the handwriting before I unfolded it. Round, slightly right-leaning, confident for a teenager who still wore eyeliner like war paint. I promised to always protect Daddy like Mommy does. Even when it's hard, even when he's tired, I will not let anyone hurt him, ever. And Emily, in 16. There are moments when grief holds your jaw and makes you chew slowly on the past. I sat on the edge of the bed and read that line until the letters blurred. The vending machine hummed outside the door like a distant generator. I heard the squeak of my wife's hospital shoes in my head, saw Emily's varsity sweater against the fluorescent light, felt the brittle courage of a girl making a vow too big for her hands. I slid the page back into the box and something caught. A little give beneath the velvet. The tray lifted out. Beneath it, a second layer I didn't know existed. My breath shortened. Inside, stacked with the precision of someone equal parts scared and methodical, lay a photocopy of my driver's license, my social security card scan, 2 General Durable Power of Attorney draft forms from a legal templates website, with sticky notes reading Needs Notary, Ask Daniel, and Use Dad's full legal name. A printout of the county recorder's How to File a Deed page, highlighted in neon yellow, and a single index card in Emily's adult handwriting. Dad keeps estate binder in office safe. Combination, her mother's birthday. The room tilted, then steadied. I reached for the ring, and for a bizarre second, the plain gold band looked like a handcuff. I ran one finger over the highlighted lines, witness requirements, notary stamps, grantor, and grantee, and felt the kind of calm that happens when a storm finally declares itself. It wasn't a question anymore of whether they were considering something. They had a plan. They had documentation. They had my identifiers. And they had my daughter's handwriting on instructions to find the binder I'd guarded since before she learned to parallel park. I heard my own voice in my head, steady, measured, the one I used with men who forgot who owned the job site. They mistake my kindness for weakness. It didn't feel like a line. It felt like a diagnosis. I photographed everything, front, back, margins, even the smudge where coffee had kissed the corner of the deed instructions. I slid each page into a fresh gallon bag from my shaving kit and labeled them with the motel pen like I was already in a courtroom because someday I would be. Then I called Margaret. My late wife's sister answers the phone like people used to answer doors, ready to help or to shut you out. "It's me," I said. "I need your eyes." She didn't ask if I was okay. She's too honest for fake questions. "Where?" "Sunset Motor Lodge, off Route 7, room 12. 10 minutes? It took her 11. She arrived in a cardigan and the same no-nonsense shoes she wore as a bank manager for 30 years. She hugged me quickly, functional, not performative. Then I laid the jewelry box out on the little round table, like evidence in a deposition. She didn't touch anything. She leaned down, read, and made the soft sound women make when they see a child's art next to a burn mark. "Daniel's fingerprints are on the post-its," she murmured. "But the card with your combination, that's Emily." She looked up at me. "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "I don't want sorry. I want the truth." "The truth is simple," Margaret said, sitting. "He's been grooming her into doubt. She thinks this is responsibility. It's control, and it's illegal if they forged or coerced any transfer." She tapped the draft forms with a pen cap. "These aren't filed. That's our grace." "Grace expires," I said. She nodded once. "Then we move now, lawyer first, forensic accountant second. You need injunctions, fraud watch on your credit, and a full pull of recent recorder filings." "I'll pay whatever it costs." "You will," she said dryly, "because you're going to win this clean." Clean. The word felt right in my mouth. She took out her phone and texted 3 contacts whose names read like a safety net. A real estate attorney who'd beaten fraudsters twice in the last year, a forensic accountant retired from a big firm who liked puzzles, and a notary supervisor she'd mentored who owed her favors. "Appointments tomorrow, 9 and noon," she said. "Tonight, you sleep." "I won't," I said. "You will enough," she countered, "because you have to be clear-eyed when you take your life back." She left me with a paper bag of sandwiches I hadn't asked for, an old banker's box she found in her trunk for the originals, and the kind of look that tells you you're not crazy for expecting better from the people you raised. After she was gone, I washed my face and stared at the man in the mirror. He looked older, yes, but he also looked exactly like the man who'd built a company from the rebar up, the man who'd mortgaged a house to make payroll and never missed a paycheck, the man who taught a 16-year-old girl to drive a stick shift in a grocery store parking lot while she laughed and stalled and tried again. I placed Emily's diary page, "Protect Daddy like Mommy does," back under the ring where it had slept for years, and I slid the false bottom layer into the banker's box with the care of a paramedic moving a vital organ. I turned off the light. The motel hummed, the vending machine blinked, Route 7 whispered its truck lullaby. I lay on the flatbed and listened to all of it, letting purpose settle where panic had burned. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number, a text. "This is a reminder, notary appointment tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Confirm?" A link followed, shortened, anonymous, the kind used when someone doesn't want you to see the sender. I stared at the time. 10:30 a.m., my wife's birthday. The confirmation pulsed on my screen. 10:30 a.m., the day they used for every password our family ever set. And, in that instant, I understood. They weren't planning to steal my life someday. They were planning to notarize it out from under me tomorrow. When betrayal takes root, it doesn't stay hidden. It struts. It parades. It wears luxury on its sleeve like a medal. Daniel's victory lap began with a watch. A Rolex, gold face, diamond markers, the kind of thing a man either inherits or buys with money that isn't his. He wore it to dinner one night, flicking his wrist like he was adjusting his cuff, the light catching Emily's eyes the way it used to catch mine when I bought her mother a gift. "Nice piece," I said, sipping my water. He smiled with mock humility. "Just a reward for hard work, sir. We all deserve to enjoy the fruits of our labor." Fruits of whose labor? I wanted to spit the words. Instead, I cut my steak with deliberate calm, because rage is loud but strategy whispers. A week later, it was the car. A brand new BMW in metallic gray, parked in the driveway like a sentinel. The kind of car that announces its arrival with a hum of wealth. Emily's laughter carried from the front porch as she filmed him, pretending to open the door for her like a celebrity. I stepped outside, shielding my eyes from the sun. Big purchase. Daniel leaned on the roof, arms crossed. "Life's short. No point driving clunkers when you can afford comfort." Emily chimed in, her tone rehearsed, almost defensive. "Dad, you're overreacting. He's securing our future. You should be happy we're stable." Stable. I almost laughed. Stability isn't built on forged deeds and siphoned retirement funds. Stability doesn't require you to dismantle your father to feed your husband's ego. But Emily looked at me with pleading eyes. the same eyes that once begged me to check for monsters under her bed. And I saw the truth. She wasn't pleading for me to understand Daniel. She was pleading for me not to force her to choose between us. I swallowed my words. For now. Every new extravagance was a needle, and I felt the thread pulling tighter around my throat. A golf club membership appeared next. Then weekend trips for business, where Emily posted filtered photos from resort balconies. I didn't need to ask who was paying. The answer bled from every statement, every unexplained transfer. At night in my motel, I laid the evidence on the bed like a crime scene. Tax notices, bank screenshots, drafts of forged documents. Each piece was a puzzle shard, jagged and dangerous. Together, they painted a picture of theft, not only of money, but of dignity. What cut deepest wasn't Daniel's smug parade. It was Emily's blindness. Or maybe her choice not to see. She called one evening, voice light, but rushed, like she was reading lines. "Dad, I wish you'd come around. Daniel isn't trying to hurt you. He just wants to make sure we're all safe." "Safe from what?" I asked, keeping my tone measured. A pause. "From mistakes, from getting old and vulnerable." I closed my eyes. "Emily, do you hear yourself? I'm not incompetent. I'm your father." Her voice cracked, but only for a second. "I can't talk about this now. Please, Dad, don't make it harder." Click. The line went dead. I sat in the silence, the weight of her words pressing like a hand over my mouth. Mistakes, old, vulnerable, not hers, mine. Language planted by him, watered by repetition, growing in her until she believed it was her own. The next day, Margaret came by the motel with fresh documents. She set down the banker's box and fixed me with her no-nonsense gaze. "They're moving faster than we thought," she said. "Transfers, filings, even a petition draft for guardianship. He's not just after the house. He wants you declared unfit." Unfit. That word cracked something in me I hadn't let myself feel until then. The rage wasn't hot. It was cold, sharp, surgical. I nodded slowly. "Then it's time we stop watching and start striking." Margaret smiled grimly. "Good, because I've already lined up the lawyer. Tomorrow, we file." That night, I couldn't sleep. I drove past the house. Through the lit window, I saw them celebrating. Emily swirling wine in her glass, Daniel laughing as he held up paperwork like a trophy. My granddaughter danced around them with crayons in her hands, oblivious. From the curb, I watched my daughter raise her glass and clink it against his. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the toast. To victory, to control, to the empire they thought they'd built on my back. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. They thought the game was over. They thought I was beaten. But they had forgotten one thing. I built empires from dirt and blueprints, and I wasn't about to let mine be stolen with ink and arrogance. Through the window, I saw Daniel hold up a document with my name already signed at the bottom. And in that moment, I realized they weren't planning a theft. They were already celebrating a crime that had my forged blessing written all over it. By morning, resolve had dried into something usable. I shaved, put on the suit my wife always said made me look like a judge, and drove to Margaret's townhouse. She opened the door before I could knock twice, cardigan buttoned crooked, hair pinned the way nurses pin bravery on patients. She hugged me with both arms and no words. On her dining table, everything was laid out in rows like a careful crime lab. My photos of the false-bottom jewelry box, the highlighted recorder's guide, the durable POA draft forms, with post-its in Emily's handwriting, printouts of Daniel's celebratory posts with the Rolex flashing like a confession. She'd added her own stack, a neat folder stamped Training and Compliance, First State Bank. "Coffee," she said, already pouring. "We work while it's hot." I sat. "Tell me straight, Margaret." She met my eyes. "He's been isolating her. Slow drip. That's textbook." She tapped the folder. "And he's been rehearsing her. Financial concern language, guardianship buzzwords, the kind that make clerks overstep. I trained tellers for 30 years, how to spot this. Can we prove it? We can show a pattern," she said. "And patterns win judges." She slid over an affidavit template. "I'll swear to what I've seen. Daniel intercepting your mail, discouraging Emily from talking to family, pushing for centralized passwords, asking hypothetical questions about notarizing a deed without the grantor present. Her mouth sharpened. He didn't know who he was chatting with in that lobby. You? Of course. She opened another file. Visitor log, Lakeview Notary Services. 2 weeks ago, he came in with Emily. He did all the talking. Wanted to pre-verify a quitclaim deed. Asked if a photocopied ID would be sufficient in case, quote, the signer gets overwhelmed by forms. I told him state law requires the signer to appear, and any notary who cuts that corner loses their commission. I felt my jaw tense. And Emily? She stood 3 feet behind him, Margaret said softly, nodding when he looked back, like a student checking an answer key. Guilt surged, stupid and human. This isn't the child I raised, I heard myself say. This is the child he's training, she corrected, then gentler. We'll get her back with the truth, but first, we protect you. The real estate attorney joined us over video at 9 sharp. Gray hair, precise diction, no time for drama. I liked him immediately. You've done good work preserving evidence, he said, after I walked him through the documents, holding each page to the camera like an oath. Here's the track. Emergency temporary restraining order, enjoining any transfer of title, notice of potential fraud to the county recorder, cease and desist to the notary services Daniels visited, and a fraud guard placed with the credit bureaus to block new credit lines. Timeline? I asked. Today? He said. Speed is your friend. Also, we'll file a petition for declaratory relief, stating there's no valid transfer and that any signature obtained under undue influence is void. Elder financial abuse? I said, the words tasting like iron. If we find forged or coerced documents, yes. For now, civil posture with an eye to criminal referral. Cost? He named a number that sounded heavy, then followed with a phrase that sounded like breath. Recoverable. We hung up. Margaret slid a legal pad to me. Call list, she said. I prepped scripts. You'll speak as measured and disappointed, not angry. She raised an eyebrow, the ant version of a sergeant. Understood? I exhaled. Understood. Evidence speaks louder than excuses. Good, she said, pleased. Now you're thinking like the man who built an empire from concrete and obstinacy. We worked. I contacted the county recorder and filed the fraud alert. I spoke with the credit bureaus, placing freezes and passwords no one outside my ribcage could guess. Margaret called her former branch manager, who in turn pinged every notary in their network. No remote notarizations. All signers must appear. Verify against live ID. Call Margaret on any attempt by Daniel Whitaker or Emily Whitaker. Net is up, she said, setting her phone down. Let him swim. At noon, the forensic accountant arrived, retired, curious eyes. A man who looked like he solved puzzles at breakfast. He reviewed my bank statements and whistled under his breath at the quiet siphons. Recurring micro-transfers masked as utility auto-pays. A new sweep account that looked like a savings bucket until you checked the owner name. Classic camouflage, he said. We'll subpoena the receiving bank through counsel. For now, print everything. Timestamps, IP logs, if your bank will release them. And take screenshots to preserve visual context. Fraudsters hate their UI trail showing up in court. Can you quantify exposure? I asked. Prelim glance says mid-5 figures moved, he said. But more concerning is the setup for larger moves, beneficiary placeholders, trusted contact forms submitted online. He glanced at Margaret. He's building pipes. Then we turn off the water, she replied. We broke long enough for sandwiches I couldn't taste, then drafted Margaret's affidavit. She wrote clean and specific, dates, places, behaviors, no adjectives, just verbs. As she typed, she murmured to herself, old banker habits surfacing. Don't tell them it's raining, show them the wet coat. When she finished, she read it aloud, hearing it gathered in her measured voice, intercepting mail, discouraging contact, rehearsed scripts, attempts to pre-verify a deed, made the room feel smaller and my back feel straighter. I initialed every page, the way I've always done when things matter. Last piece, Margaret said, sliding over an envelope. I saved this. Inside was a printed text thread Emily had shown her months ago, asking for advice about helping Dad. It began kindly, budget suggestions, meal trains, but shifted as Daniel's messages took over. He forgets more than he admits. Courts prefer clean paperwork. Use Mom's birthday for everything? It keeps him calm. I stared at the dates. The grooming had started before the funeral flowers browned. Margaret touched my wrist. I know what you're about to say, so don't. Love makes fools of the best of us. Strategy fixes what love can't. I nodded and steadied my voice. Every move is planned, every consequence calculated. We assembled the emergency filing packet like we were packing a parachute. Tabs, exhibits, affidavits, photos. I signed where the lawyer flagged with blue post-its. Margaret affixed labels with a precision that would make a surgeon jealous. At 3:40 p.m., I scanned the last page and felt a hum in my chest that wasn't fear. It was the sound of my life moving from reaction to action. "Courier's on the way," Margaret said. "Judge's clerk expects it by 4:30. We'll have an answer tonight." I stood, suddenly aware of the ache in my knees and the steadiness in my hands. Through the window, afternoon light spilled across Margaret's tidy yard. Once, I thought, Emily used to help her aunt deadhead the roses. She liked the crisp snap of the stem, the way a plant accepts pruning to grow stronger. My phone buzzed. A push notification from the county recorder. New instrument recorded against my property. The room fell silent except for the faint tick of Margaret's wall clock. I tapped the link. A scanned image loaded, black ink on legal paper, quitclaim deed, grantor, me, grantee, Emily and Daniel Whitaker, as joint tenants. Recorded today, 3:28 p.m., and there it was. My name, my signature, tilt, pressure, flourish, only it wasn't my hand. The deed glared back at me from the screen, my forged blessing stamped by the county, and in that instant I understood we weren't racing a plan anymore. We were chasing a crime that had already been given a seal and a date. I sat across from the lawyer's mahogany desk, my hands trembling as I unfolded the documents I dug out of my late wife's old filing cabinet. Contracts, transfer receipts, even a few emails I had printed out years ago when Elizabeth warned me to keep records just in case. At the time, I'd laughed. Who would I need to protect myself from? My own family? Now the answer burned in my chest like acid. My daughter and her husband. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Carter, adjusted her glasses and tapped one document with a manicured finger. "This," she said firmly, "is fraudulent conveyance. They had no legal right to move the deed from your name to his family's. And if they used your signature without consent—" "They did," I cut in, my voice low, controlled, though every nerve in me screamed for rage. "That signature isn't mine. My daughter forged it, or she let her husband do it." For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Ms. Carter leaned back, studying me with that expression lawyers use when they weigh whether a case is worth the fight. Then she nodded slowly. "We can build this. Fraudulent transfer, constructive trust, possibly even elder abuse charges depending on jurisdiction. They overplayed their hand." I exhaled, my chest tight with both relief and fury. I gave her everything. I worked 60-hour weeks for decades, so she'd never know hunger or fear. And this is how she repays me, by stealing the home her mother and I built together. My throat tightened. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "They think I'll roll over. They think I'll die quietly while they enjoy my house. They don't know me at all." Ms. Carter's lips curved in a grim smile. "Then let's show them who you are." The following weeks blurred into a storm of paperwork, subpoenas, and strategy sessions. Every document I handed over, bank statements, contractor invoices, even photos of Elizabeth and me signing the original mortgage, became another nail in the coffin my daughter and her husband were building for themselves. Yet at night, when I lay in my too quiet home, the other side of the betrayal gnawed at me. Not just the theft, not just the fraud, but the voice of my daughter, cold as steel, saying, "It's theirs now." Elizabeth used to say that our daughter had her eyes. Warm, soft, trusting. But those eyes had looked at me like I was a stranger trespassing in his own life. I replayed that scene 100 times until my chest ached with the weight of it. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out the family photo albums. There she was, 5 years old, gap-toothed smile, sitting on my shoulders at Disneyland. 13, clutching her first violin with pride. 21, in her graduation gown, my arm around her shoulders. I had thought those pictures were evidence of love. Now they looked like exhibits in a trial for misplaced trust. The case built momentum faster than I imagined. Ms. Carter discovered not only the fraudulent deed, but also a string of suspicious transfers, cash moved between accounts, checks written to Palmer's parents, even a fake renovation contract, billed to me, but paid directly to them. Each revelation was like another blow, but also another weapon in my arsenal. This isn't just a property dispute anymore, Ms. Carter told me, her voice edged with iron. This is systematic financial abuse. We're going to take them apart piece by piece. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt something new rise inside me. Not despair, not heartbreak, but power. Cold, steady power. The court date was set. I walked into that courtroom in my best suit, back straight despite the ache in my knees. Across the aisle sat my daughter and her husband, whispering furiously to their lawyer. She wouldn't even look at me. That hurt worse than I'd expected. But when the judge called us to order and Ms. Carter laid out the evidence with surgical precision, I saw something flicker across Palmer's face. Panic. And in that moment, I knew. This was far from over. But the tide had turned. I leaned forward, whispering under my breath, words meant only for me. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. And then Ms. Carter dropped the final piece of evidence, a bank statement that showed my daughter herself had signed off on the wire transfer. My own child's name, in black ink, authorizing the theft of everything Elizabeth and I had built. The courtroom fell silent, but inside me, something roared awake. She hadn't just chosen her husband over me, she had chosen to destroy me, and I would never forgive her for it. The courtroom had its own gravity. The air was heavy, pulling on every word, every glance. I sat straight in my chair, hands folded, while Ms. Carter presented the evidence piece by piece, her voice measured, her rhythm relentless. She wielded documents the way I once wielded blueprints, every line purposeful, every mark carrying weight. Across the aisle, Daniel and Emily whispered furiously to their lawyer. A man younger than he looked comfortable being, his tie too sharp for the occasion. Daniel had the smirk of someone used to winning before the fight even started. Emily sat stiff, her lips pressed into a pale line. Then Ms. Carter handed up the bank statement. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning. This shows an electronic transfer of $75,000 from Mr. Whitaker's account to a private account registered under Mrs. Emily Whitaker. My daughter's name, my daughter's hand in the theft. The room held its breath. Mrs. Whitaker, the judge said, voice steady. Is this your account? Emily's mouth opened, then closed. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering too fast. She finally stammered, yes, but it wasn't like that. It was a household account, for expenses. Expenses? Ms. Carter echoed, her tone polite but scalpel sharp. Would those expenses include the Rolex purchase 2 weeks later, or the down payment on the BMW? Both traced directly to this account. Emily's eyes darted toward Daniel, his jaw tightened. He leaned forward, attempting charm, as if the courtroom were a dinner party. Your Honor, my wife didn't handle the finances. I managed everything for efficiency. Any transfers would have been administrative. The judge raised an eyebrow. Administrative? Yes, sir. Consolidating, simplifying. Families these days have too many accounts, confusing for older members. I was protecting him. He gestured toward me like I was a frail ornament. My chest burned, but I stayed silent. Letting Ms. Carter have the floor was the hardest, wisest thing I could do. She tapped the bank statement again. Protecting him by transferring assets without his knowledge, by filing a quitclaim deed with a forged signature, by attempting to pre-verify documents at a notary without the grantor present. She paused just long enough. We have witness testimony for that. Margaret shifted behind me, steady as a stone wall. The judge looked at Daniel, his face unreadable. Forgery is a serious allegation. Daniel's charm faltered, his laugh coming out too loud, too hollow. Sir, with respect, my father-in-law's memory isn't what it used to be. He's confused, mistaken. That word again. Confused. The poison Daniel had dripped into Emily's ear until she believed it. But this time, the judge didn't nod sympathetically. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Do you have medical evidence of diminished capacity? Daniel froze. Emily's hand shot to his arm, squeezing hard. Their lawyer shuffled papers, stalling. No, Your Honor, the lawyer admitted finally. Then we proceed on the presumption of competence, the judge said firmly. And the documents presented suggest otherwise, that the competence was taken advantage of. The crack split wider. Daniel's smile dropped entirely, his jaw working like he was chewing on his own arrogance. Emily looked down at her lap, her fingers twisting her wedding band until her knuckles whitened. For the first time, I saw it. Hesitation. Guilt. A flash of the girl who once promised to protect me, now trapped in a cage Daniel built, but she helped lock. My throat tightened. I wanted to reach her, to say her name the way I did when she was a child, to remind her of who we used to be. But this was not the place for tenderness. This was the place for truth, and truth was winning. Ms. Carter closed the folder with quiet finality. Your Honor, the evidence shows a clear pattern of undue influence, financial exploitation, and fraudulent transfer. We ask the court to freeze all accounts, void the deed, and appoint an independent trustee until this matter is resolved. The judge nodded slowly. Motion under advisement. We will reconvene after review. The gavel struck. Daniel stood immediately, whispering venom into Emily's ear. She nodded, but her eyes flickered toward me. Just for a second, quick and broken, as though she wanted to speak but no longer knew how. Margaret touched my shoulder. You see it, she whispered. The cracks are showing. I nodded, but inside me, something darker stirred. The cracks were just the beginning. Because when walls fall, they don't do it neatly. They crush what's inside. As Daniel pulled Emily toward the exit, I caught the flash of panic in his eyes. For the first time, he knew the performance was failing. And for the first time, I realized I might not just win my house back, I might win my daughter back too. But only if I struck fast, before he rebuilt the mask. Once the courthouse steps are their own kind of battlefield. Cameras weren't there, thank God, but gossip travels faster than any lens. As I walked down with Margaret at my side, I could already feel the shift. Daniel wasn't retreating, he was regrouping. Smile, Margaret murmured. He'll weaponize shadows if you look broken. I straightened my back, the way I used to when union reps tried to undercut a bid. Dignity is armor. Daniel emerged moments later, Emily at his elbow. He put on his best grin, broad and easy, the Rolex catching sunlight like a signal flare. We're just trying to help Dad, he announced to the small knot of onlookers and clerks lingering nearby. His voice carried, crafted for ears beyond the courthouse. It's heartbreaking when age makes someone suspicious of the very people who love him most. A clerk nodded sympathetically. Another muttered something I couldn't catch. Emily kept her gaze on the ground, silent, letting his words fill the air. Is that your narrative now? Margaret said coolly. That theft is love? Daniel turned, grin unfading. Margaret, always dramatic. We're family. Families take care of each other. Even when one member forgets what's best. Forget. There it was again, the poison wrapped in charm. I stepped forward, voice steady. Families also don't forge signatures. Families don't drain accounts for watches and cars. Families don't lie in court. His smile faltered for a heartbeat, just long enough to show me the bruise beneath. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. You think today rattled me? This isn't about court. It's about perception, about who the neighbors believe, about who Emily believes. You may win a motion or two, old man, but you're already losing the story. Margaret touched my arm, a silent warning not to rise to the bait. I exhaled, stepped back. But inside, rage sharpened into something colder. Strategy. That evening, the counterattack began in earnest. A concerned friend posted in the community Facebook group about how sad it was to see me struggling and how grateful they were that Emily and her husband were stepping up to keep him safe. The next morning, a local pastor called to say Emily had asked for prayers, for patience as she navigated her father's decline. By noon, 3 old colleagues texted me privately. Everything okay? Heard you're having memory issues. Daniel wasn't fighting me in the courtroom anymore. He was fighting me in the court of public opinion. Margaret slammed her laptop shut. Classic Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. He's setting you up as the confused aggressor and them as the dutiful caretakers. If this sticks, juries sympathize with them before you ever open your mouth. I rubbed my temples. Then we burn the script before it spreads. How? Truth, I said simply. Cold, documented, undeniable truth. And if we can't get the town to see it yet, we'll make sure the judge does. Then their story collapses under the weight of fact. Still, Daniel's reach showed its claws. The bank delayed freezing one of the accounts, citing uncertainty about the owner's competence. A notary Margaret had trusted for years suddenly stopped returning calls. My granddaughter's school sent home a note. Are there updated guardianship papers we should have on file? Every move screamed Daniel's hand. He was tightening the noose socially, hoping to isolate me until even Emily believed his lies completely. That night, I sat at Margaret's table while she poured tea like it was medicine. "He's testing you," she said, "waiting to see if you'll break under the narrative." "I've broken concrete with less force," I muttered. We worked late, drafting sworn affidavits from neighbors who had seen Daniel intercept my mail, from Margaret's notary contacts confirming his shady inquiries, from a former employee of mine willing to testify that my memory was sharper than most 30-year-olds. Each piece was a stitch, sewing up the fabric he was trying to tear. At midnight, I checked my phone one last time before bed. A new message waited from an unknown number. "Stop fighting. Settle quietly. Otherwise, everyone learns what really happened the night Elizabeth died." My blood froze. Elizabeth's death had been natural, cruel, but natural. Cancer doesn't conspire. But the implication was clear. Daniel was ready to drag her memory through the mud if it meant silencing me. I set the phone down, hands steady now. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about legacy, about whether my wife's name would be smeared to protect a thief. And in that moment, I swore something I hadn't dared yet. I would not only win back my house and my dignity, I would destroy Daniel's mask so completely that no one, not Emily, not the neighbors, not the courts, could ever believe him again. The message glared on my screen like a dare. If Daniel was willing to weaponize my dead wife's memory, then the war had only just begun. And the next move would cut deeper than either of us had planned. Daniel thought he was clever. He mistook his loud lies for truth, his social posturing for victory. That was his flaw. He always had to be seen winning. And arrogance, I've learned, is a door you don't need to break down. You just hold it open and let the fool walk through. The morning after his threat, Margaret and I sat in her kitchen with steaming mugs between us and a plan forming on the table. "He wants perception," she said, flipping open her notebook. Then we let him talk himself into a corner, publicly, legally, both. I nodded slowly. "We bait him with control, make him think he's still steering." "Exactly. We don't need to fight his story head on. We just need him to contradict himself where it matters, on record." We began with the simplest trap, paperwork. Miss Carter filed a request for admissions, a legal tool that forces the other side to answer yes or no questions under oath. Simple things. Did you transfer funds from Mr. Whitaker's account? Did you purchase luxury goods with those funds? Did you attempt to notarize a deed without him present? Questions where the truth would convict him, but a lie would unravel under documents we already had. "Either way, he loses," Margaret said, satisfaction tugging at her lips. But we didn't stop there. I called an old friend, Tom Jenkins, retired journalist, the kind who never lost his nose for hypocrisy. "Tom," I said, voice steady, "how do you feel about stories of financial abuse in families, deeds, forgery, that sort of thing?" He chuckled. "I feel like my readers eat them for breakfast. You got one?" "Not yet," I said, "but you will." We drafted an anonymous tip package, photocopies of the jewelry box documents, screenshots of the forged deed, even Daniel's smug Facebook post about protecting assets paired with his brand new Rolex. Margaret mailed it from a neighboring county, no return address. By the time it landed on Tom's desk, Daniel would already be tangled in his own courtroom lies. The next step was quieter, but deadlier. Money trails. The forensic accountant traced Daniel's household account to a second account under his cousin's name. An old trick, layering transfers to look like family support. But the cousin had a record, a bankruptcy filing with every alias tied to him. "Arrogant men think no one's watching," the accountant said, sliding over the report. "But the IRS never sleeps." I almost smiled. "Neither do I." The real move came a week later, at a mediation session. Daniel swaggered in, sunglasses perched on his head indoors, Emily trailing behind like a shadow. He leaned across the polished table, his grin rehearsed. "Let's be reasonable," he he said smoothly. We'll drop claims if Dad signs over joint ownership officially. It avoids ugliness. He can even stay in the guest room. We're not monsters. I let silence stretch until it was brittle. Then I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. You already filed a forged deed. Now you're asking me to ratify your crime. His smirk twitched. That's a big accusation, old man. Ms. Carter slid the forged deed across the table, then placed the original mortgage document beside it. Same signature, 10 years apart. Only problem is, the curvature, slant, and pen pressure don't match. Our handwriting expert will testify, which means the deed is void. For the first time, Daniel's face went pale. Emily's eyes widened, flickering between us and the paper. I spoke softly, just for her. Do you see now? Do you see what he's dragged you into? She didn't answer, but her hand trembled on her lap. Daniel forced a laugh, trying to regain ground. Experts can be bought, and judges don't like family squabbles. True, Ms. Carter said crisply. Which is why we also filed with the district attorney. Fraudulent conveyance, elder financial abuse. This isn't just civil anymore. The room froze. Even the mediator cleared his throat nervously. Daniel sat back, mask slipping. His arrogance had walked him straight into the trap, demanding ownership while evidence of fraud stacked high. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. I kept my voice calm, measured, final. You should have stayed in your lane, Daniel, but you were too hungry to hide, and now everyone will see exactly what you are. As we left the mediation room, my phone buzzed. A news alert lit the screen. Local man investigated for fraudulent deed transfer. Tom Jenkins hadn't waited. Daniel's arrogance was already headline news, and this time, there was no mask left for him to hide behind. The news broke faster than I expected. By the time I poured my first cup of coffee, Tom's article was already ricocheting across town. Local developer investigated for fraudulent deed transfer. Allegations of elder financial abuse surface. Daniel's face stared back from the screen, pulled from a corporate golf tournament photo, all smug grin and polished polo. The article didn't mince words, forged documents, suspicious transfers, luxury purchases under scrutiny. My name was there too, but not as a victim of age, as the victim of theft. I scrolled slowly, every word sinking into me like a balm. It wasn't vindication yet, but it was sunlight, and cockroaches hate sunlight. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Neighbors, old friends, even men I hadn't spoken to in years called to say they'd read the story. We always knew something was off about that son-in-law of yours, one said, another. You hang tough, everyone's behind you. For weeks, Daniel had painted me as the doddering old man, confused and bitter. Now the narrative shifted. Now he was the manipulator. But Daniel didn't go quietly. That evening, he went live on social media, Emily at his side. He spoke with that same practiced charm, voice soft, almost tearful. We're devastated, he told the camera. My wife and I have been caring for her father during his decline, and now false accusations are tearing this family apart. We never wanted this to be public, but the lies leave us no choice. We only ever wanted to keep him safe. Emily sat beside him, hands folded, eyes downcast. The perfect picture of a dutiful daughter caught in her father's confusion. The comments poured in, some sympathetic, others skeptical. But then one user posted the article link, pointing out the forged deed. Another posted screenshots of Daniel's Rolex selfie with the caption, "Caring for Dad must pay well." The tide turned quickly. Supporters became questioners. Trolls became accusers. Daniel's smile stiffened as the comments scrolled faster. Emily shifted in her seat, her jaw tight, her eyes flicking toward him with something dangerously close to doubt. I sat in Margaret's living room, watching the stream, my chest tight. This was the unraveling, not in court, not in whispers, but in real time, in front of hundreds of eyes. Still, I couldn't ignore the hollow ache. Seeing Emily there, parroting his lies, broke something in me deeper than anger. I wanted to reach through the screen, shake her, remind her of who she used to be. But the screen doesn't give, it only shows. The next day, the backlash was everywhere. The pastor who once prayed for Emily's patience called Margaret, apologizing for being misled. My granddaughter's teacher sent a message asking if I wanted to be added as the primary pickup contact for safety. And at the grocery store, Two women in line whispered just loud enough, "That poor man. Can you imagine your own daughter siding with a thief?" Daniel hated whispers he couldn't control. His arrogance needed applause, so he pushed harder. He hosted a backyard support dinner, inviting neighbors to hear our side. Margaret's friend attended, quiet as a shadow, and reported back. Daniel spun tales of my unstable moods, my memory slips, how Emily had sacrificed everything to care for me. But the neighbors weren't nodding like before. They were asking questions about the Rolex, about the car, about why the county clerk had flagged the deed as fraudulent. By dessert, Daniel's smile was cracking. Emily excused herself early, stepping inside with red eyes. Margaret's friend caught a glimpse of her through the kitchen window, phone in hand, whispering urgently. She wasn't calling Daniel, she was calling someone else. When I heard that, hope flickered inside me, small, fragile, but alive. Still, I knew hope wasn't enough. Arrogant men cornered by truth grow dangerous. And Daniel was a man who hated losing. That night, as I walked Margaret to her car, a shadow peeled away from the hedge. Daniel, his face was darker than I'd ever seen it, stripped of charm. "You think you're clever?" he hissed. "You think you've won because some hack reporter printed lies, but you're tearing this family apart. If Emily has to choose between us, she won't pick you. She never will." I stared at him, my voice low but steady. "You're right. She shouldn't have to choose between a liar and her father. She should just open her eyes." For a moment, he stepped closer, fists tight at his sides. Then he forced a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Careful, old man. If you push too far, you'll regret what I do next." As he vanished back into the dark, his words echoed like a warning bell. He wasn't just losing control. He was ready to scorch the earth to keep it. And I realized the fight wasn't about who would win anymore. It was about who would survive Daniel's downfall. Cornered men don't retreat gracefully. They thrash. They claw. And Daniel was no exception. The week after Tom's article dropped, the cracks widened fast. His business partners started pulling out of deals. The golf club suspended his membership, pending investigation. Even his cousin, the one tied to the shadow account, suddenly stopped answering his calls. But arrogance doesn't fade. It mutates. The first strike came through the bank. I logged into my account one morning only to find a withdrawal request pending for nearly my entire savings. Not processed, flagged. The bank's fraud department called me within the hour. "Mr. Whitaker, did you authorize this transfer to an account in your son-in-law's name?" "No," I said flatly. "And if you had processed it, you'd be complicit in fraud." The rep stammered an apology. Margaret, listening on speaker, took notes. "He's getting sloppy," she whispered. "Sloppy means desperate. Desperate means dangerous." By evening, the second strike landed, this time through the police. A patrol car pulled up outside Margaret's house, where I'd been staying. The officer knocked politely, but his words had venom. "Mr. Whitaker, we received a report of elder neglect and financial mismanagement, a claim that you've been hiding assets and refusing medical care." Margaret bristled. "From who?" The officer didn't say, but he didn't have to. The fingerprints of Daniel's narrative were all over it. I kept my voice calm. "Officer, would you like to see the court filings showing I'm the one who initiated fraud claims? Or perhaps the medical clearance I had just last month from my doctor?" His eyes flickered. "If you have documentation, sir, it makes my job easier." I handed him the folder Margaret insisted I keep by the door. Bank statements, doctor's note, affidavits. He flipped through, nodded once, and shut his notebook. "Thank you for your time. We'll close this out." As the cruiser pulled away, Margaret muttered, "That was his test balloon. Next time, he'll go bigger." She was right. 2 days later, my granddaughter's school called. "Mr. Whitaker," the principal said carefully, "we received a notarized letter stating that you're no longer permitted contact with Lily. It was signed by your daughter and her husband." My stomach turned cold. "And you believed it?" "We didn't process it," he said quickly, "because the notary stamp looked off, but we're obligated to inform you." Forgery again. This time, aim not at property, but blood. He wasn't just stealing my house anymore. He was trying to steal my family. That night, I sat alone in the quiet, rage coiled in my chest like barbed wire. I thought of my wife's jewelry box, of Emily's promise as a teenager to protect me. I thought of my granddaughter's crayons scattered on the living room rug, the innocence Daniel was now trying to cut me off from. Margaret found me at the table, fists clenched, jaw tight. She set down a mug of coffee and said simply, "He's burning his bridges. Let him. Ashes make the best evidence." She was right again. Each reckless move only added to the pile of proof Ms. Carter was building. But proof doesn't ease the sting of betrayal. Proof doesn't quiet the fear of what a desperate man might try next. And Daniel wasn't done. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. His voice filled the room, low and venomous. "You think the court or the press can save you. You're old, you're weak, and you're alone. If you don't back off, I'll make sure Emily never speaks to you again. I'll make sure Lily forgets your name. You'll die a ghost, and nobody will care." The words chilled me more than the threats of theft or fraud, because this was his final card, erasure, to steal not just my assets, but my legacy. I sat there, the voicemail still echoing, and I felt something inside me shift. Fear hardened into resolve, grief sharpened into fury. Daniel thought he was ending the game. He didn't realize he'd just moved it to my board. As I replayed his venomous words, one truth crystallized in my chest. Daniel wasn't just trying to take what was mine. He was daring me to destroy him. And in that moment, I knew. The final confrontation was no longer optional. It was inevitable. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my tie. The same Navy one Elizabeth bought me for our 25th anniversary. My reflection was older, yes, but behind the lines in gray, I saw steel. Not a ghost, not a victim. A man about to take his life back. Margaret drove us downtown, her knuckles tight on the wheel. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. More than ready. When we entered the courtroom, Daniel was already there, jaw set, Rolex flashing under the lights. Emily sat beside him, pale, eyes darting between us and the table piled high with evidence boxes. She didn't look at me directly. Not yet. Ms. Carter began with calm precision. She laid out the fraudulent deed, the forged notary stamp, the attempted withdrawals, even the false guardianship letter to the school. Each document slid across the judge's bench like another brick in Daniel's coffin. But the real strike came next. "Your Honor," Ms. Carter said, her voice smooth as glass, "we have here a sworn affidavit from Mr. Whitaker's bank fraud department. It confirms that on March 12th, an online transfer request of nearly his entire savings account was submitted from an IP address traced to Daniel Whitaker's personal home office." The courtroom went still. Daniel shifted, his smirk cracking. The judge frowned. "Mr. Whitaker, do you deny this?" Daniel leaned forward, words slick as oil. "Your Honor, anyone could have spoofed that IP. Technology isn't reliable." "Actually," Ms. Carter interrupted, sliding over another page, "the login also used Mr. Whitaker's personal two-factor code sent to his phone, a phone registered solely in his name." Daniel's face reddened. Emily turned sharply toward him, whispering something urgent. His jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. I watched silently, my heart steady. The trap was springing. Then Ms. Carter delivered the coup de grace. "We also present Exhibit H, a financial tracing report conducted by our forensic accountant. It shows a chain of transfers leading from Mr. Whitaker's retirement account to a secondary account in the name of Brian Whitaker, Daniel's cousin. We cross-reference this with Mr. Brian Whitaker's bankruptcy filing, which lists Daniel as a co-debtor on multiple credit lines. This demonstrates not only fraudulent transfer, but collusion for concealment of assets." The judge's gavel struck once, hard. "This is now not only a civil matter, but potentially criminal. I am ordering an immediate freeze on all accounts connected to Daniel Whitaker and his associates. Furthermore, the quitclaim deed is voided pending trial. Mr. Whitaker retains sole ownership of his property." For the first time in months, I breathed without weight crushing my chest. Daniel, however, erupted. He slammed his fist on the table, voice rising. "This is bias. He's old. He's confused. You can't just take my family's word against mine." The judge's glare cut him down. "Silence, Mr. Whitaker. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt." Emily shrank into her chair, her face pale, eyes glistening. For a flicker, our gazes met. There was no victory in her eyes, only confusion, pain, pain, and perhaps, the beginning of doubt. But I didn't let myself hope yet. Court adjourned, and outside, the reporters swarmed. Tom Jenkins was among them, notebook ready. Daniel tried to speak first, but the questions weren't friendly anymore. Mr. Whitaker, how do you respond to allegations of forging your father-in-law's deed? Did you attempt to siphon his savings into your own account? Why was your cousin's bankruptcy linked to fraudulent transfers? His charm faltered. Every denial sounded thinner than the last. Cameras caught the sweat on his brow, the twitch in his jaw. Then Tom turned to me. Sir, what do you want the public to know? I met his gaze, then the cameras. My voice was steady, low, the way I used to address crews before a big build. I want people to know the truth matters. I built my home with my wife, brick by brick. I raised my daughter to know right from wrong, and I will not let lies steal what we built. Not from me, not from my granddaughter, not from my wife's memory. The words hung heavy in the air. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed. Daniel sputtered behind me, his protest drowned out by the crowd. For the first time, I felt the tide fully turn. The story wasn't his anymore. It was mine. But that night, as I returned to Margaret's, a letter was waiting at the door. No stamp, no postmark. Just my name scrawled in hurried ink. Inside, a single sheet. If you don't drop this case, you'll regret it. Emily's safety isn't guaranteed. I stood frozen on the porch, the letter shaking in my hands. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. Daniel had crossed a final line, threatening my daughter. And now, the final confrontation was no longer just about justice. It was about protecting blood. The letter burned in my pocket all night, its threat pulsing like a second heartbeat. Emily's safety isn't guaranteed. That was the line Daniel had crossed, the line no father could ignore. By morning, Ms. Carter had filed for an emergency protective order. Margaret begged me to let the police handle it, but some fights aren't fought with motions and filings. Some fights demand you stand face to face with the man trying to erase you. I called Daniel. My voice was steady, clipped. Meet me at the house, tonight. He laughed, low and mocking. Finally growing a spine, old man? No, I said, finally putting an end to this. The house was dark when I arrived. My house. My wife's roses, overgrown. My granddaughter's swing swaying in the wind. Daniel's BMW glinting in the driveway like a parasite feeding on what it didn't earn. Inside, he waited in the living room, lounging in my chair as if it were his throne. Emily sat on the sofa, arms folded, eyes red from crying. Nice of you to come home, Daniel said, smirking. Shame it won't be yours for long. I stepped forward, the letter in my hand. You think threats make you strong? You think scaring your wife into silence, scaring me into submission, makes you a man? He chuckled. What threats? Sounds like you're slipping again, old man. I dropped the letter on the coffee table. Emily leaned forward, her hand trembling as she read. Her lips parted, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes met mine directly. Daniel, what is this? She whispered. Lies, he snapped. He planted it himself. Can't you see? He's manipulating you, Emily, just like always. But her voice cracked. Always? He raised me. He gave me everything. You... She stopped, her face twisting as if the words burned. I took a step closer. My voice was quiet, but every syllable cut like steel. Emily, listen to me. I've never lied to you, not once. But he forged my name, drained my accounts, tried to take the house your mother and I built. And now he's dragging you into crimes that will destroy you too. You can choose him, or you can choose the truth. But you can't have both. Her eyes filled, tears slipping down her cheeks. She looked at Daniel, searching for something. Remorse, love, anything. But all she found was rage. Daniel shot to his feet, face twisted. Don't listen to him. He's bitter, he's weak, and he'll drag you down with him. We're building a future, Emily, and if he won't step aside, we'll... He stopped, too late realizing he'd said, we'll. Emily recoiled, covering her mouth. You forged it, she whispered. The deed, the withdrawals, all of it. Daniel reached for her arm, but I moved faster, stepping between them. My voice was low, lethal. Touch her, and you'll answer to more than just the courts. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by Emily's sobs. Daniel's mask cracked fully now. No charm, no grin, only the raw desperation of a man watching his empire collapse. "You think this ends in court?" he spat. "You think a judge can protect you? I'll ruin you, old man. I'll ruin her too." I leaned in, meeting his eyes, unflinching. "You already have." Emily stood then, shoulders squared, her voice trembling but clear. "Daniel, it's over. I'm done lying for you." His face went pale. "What did you say?" "I said I'm done." She turned to me, tears streaming. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. I was blind. But I'll testify. I'll tell them everything." The dam had broken. His last shield, my daughter, had slipped from his grasp. Daniel roared, sweeping the letter from the table, papers flying like ash. "You'll regret this, both of you." But even as he shouted, I saw it in his eyes. The fear, the collapse, the realization that the fight was lost. As Daniel stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, Emily clutched my arm and whispered, "Dad, he won't stop until he's destroyed." And in that moment, I knew. The final battle wasn't in this living room. It would be in court, under oath, where Daniel's empire would crumble for everyone to see. The courthouse felt different that morning. Not heavy, not suffocating, charged. Like the air before a storm finally breaks. I walked in with Margaret on one side and Miss Carter on the other, my daughter trailing just a step behind me. Emily's head was bowed, but when she lifted her eyes, there was no more fog, no more hesitation, just resolve. Daniel was already there, jaw set, suit wrinkled, a sheen of sweat across his forehead. His lawyer shuffled papers nervously, whispering in his ear. Daniel waved him off with a jerk of his hand. Arrogance dies hard. The judge entered, gavel striking once. "We'll proceed with testimony." Emily was called first. My heart hammered as she stepped to the stand, swearing her oath with a trembling voice. She sat down, glanced once at me, then fixed her eyes forward. "Mrs. Whitaker," Ms. Carter began gently, "did your husband attempt to persuade you to transfer your father's property into your joint ownership?" Emily swallowed. "Yes. And did he do so with your father's knowledge and consent?" Her hands twisted in her lap. "No, he said Dad wouldn't understand the paperwork. He said it was better if we handled it. He forged Dad's signature while I stood there." The words cracked through the room like thunder. I closed my eyes, fighting the swell of both grief and relief. Ms. Carter nodded softly. "And the bank transfers, the withdrawals?" Emily's voice wavered, but she spoke clearly. "Those were Daniel's ideas. He told me to sign off on them. He said it was just moving money for Dad's care. But then he bought the watch, the car, the golf membership. I knew it wasn't right. I was too afraid to stop him." The judge leaned forward, his gaze heavy. "Mrs. Whitaker, are you saying your husband orchestrated these transactions under false pretenses?" "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "I was wrong to go along with it, but I can't lie anymore." The courtroom buzzed. Daniel shot to his feet. "She's lying!" he bellowed, his face red, spittle flying. "She's been manipulated by him." He stabbed a finger toward me. "This is all his doing. He's poisoned her against me." The judge slammed the gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Whitaker, now." But Daniel didn't. He kept shouting, his mask shredded completely. "You can't take this from me. That house is mine. That money is mine. She's mine." The outburst was his undoing. Every word rang with desperation, every syllable dripping with entitlement. The jury, silent until now, shifted in their seats, their faces hardening. Even his own lawyer put his head in his hands. Finally, bailiffs moved toward him. He sagged back into his chair, still muttering, rage boiling, but powerless. Ms. Carter, calm as ever, turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the testimony speaks for itself. The documents corroborate. The transfers, the forged deed, the false guardianship attempts. This is a clear case of fraud, undue influence, and elder financial abuse. We ask for full restitution, return of assets, and referral to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." The judge's voice was firm, resonant. "The evidence is overwhelming. The deed is hereby null and void. All property and assets will be restored to Mr. Whitaker. Furthermore, I am ordering immediate seizure of accounts tied to Daniel Whitaker, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal proceedings." The gavel struck. Final. Absolute. For the first time in months, my chest loosened. The house was safe. My savings were safe. My name, my wife's memory, was safe. I looked at Emily. She was crying silently, her hands trembling. But when our eyes met, she mouthed, "I'm sorry." I nodded once. Forgiveness wouldn't come easy. But this was the first step. Behind us, Daniel erupted again as bailiffs closed in. "You can't do this to me. I built everything. I'll come back for you. I'll burn it all down." His voice cracked, no longer commanding, no longer smug, just broken. The bailiffs hauled him up, cuffing his wrists. The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads. Others whispered words I couldn't catch. And then, just as he was dragged past me, Daniel leaned close enough for only me to hear. His voice was a hiss, sharp and venomous. "This isn't over. You think you've won? Watch your back." Even in chains, even stripped of his lies, Daniel still clung to menace. And as I stood there, the weight of victory heavy on my shoulders, I realized the fight wasn't just about reclaiming my house or my name. It was about ensuring his poison never touched my family again. The days after the verdict passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and long silences. The house was mine again, but it didn't feel like victory. Not at first. I walked through the rooms with their familiar echoes, the worn creak of the stairs, the smell of cedar from the closet Elizabeth used to keep her sweaters in. It was the same house. But it wasn't the same home. Until one afternoon, when I heard a sound I thought I'd lost forever. Laughter. Lily was in the yard, her crayons scattered on the porch, her hair catching the sunlight as she drew. Emily sat beside her, quiet, her eyes swollen from the weeks of strain. But there, present, free. I stood in the doorway, watching. For the first time in months, peace seeped through the cracks where grief had been. Emily noticed me, her lips parting, guilt flickering across her face. "Dad," she started, her voice breaking. I walked to her slowly, sat beside her on the porch steps. For a long moment, we didn't speak. Lily's laughter filled the silence. Finally, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry. I was blind. I thought he loved me. I thought I was protecting you, when all I was doing was protecting him." I looked at her, my daughter, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, the woman who had broken my heart, and now the daughter who had chosen truth over lies. "Emily," I said softly, "you made mistakes, but you found your way back. That's what matters." Her eyes filled. "Do you forgive me?" Forgiveness is never simple. Betrayal leaves scars, but scars mean healing, not death. I placed my hand over hers. "In time," I said, "but today, we start again." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Lily crawled into my lap then, holding up her drawing, a house with 3 stick figures holding hands. "This is us," she said proudly. "You, me, and Mommy." I kissed her hair. "That's right, sweetheart. That's us." Daniel's fall was swift and merciless. The district attorney pressed charges: fraud, forgery, elder abuse. His business collapsed under the weight of scandal. The golf club revoked his membership permanently. His name became synonymous with greed and betrayal. The man who once strutted through town with arrogance was now a headline, a cautionary tale. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear when I heard his name, only pity. Because arrogance can build empires, but it also digs graves. In the months that followed, I repaired more than the house. I repaired trust. Emily began therapy, untangling herself from Daniel's web. She took a job at a local nonprofit, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. Margaret, ever my shield, became Lily's favorite storyteller, filling afternoons with tales of resilience and love. As for me, I found purpose again, not in money or property, but in legacy. I set up a scholarship in Elizabeth's name for young women pursuing law so they would have the tools to fight manipulation like Daniel's. I wanted Elizabeth's memory to be more than a rosebush in a photo album. I wanted it to live, to protect, to guide. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the yard gold, Emily sat beside me on the porch. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you ever regret fighting back? All the strain, the pain, the scars it left?" I thought for a long moment. Then I shook my head. No, because fighting back wasn't just about saving the house. It was about saving us, about proving that truth is stronger than lies, that family, real family, doesn't crumble under pressure. It bends, it hurts, but it survives. She leaned her head on my shoulder, just like she had as a girl. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you're right, she whispered. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything that had passed, the loss, the betrayal, the justice, and beneath it all, the quiet hum of legacy, the knowledge that Elizabeth's memory, my love, our family, would endure. In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying Daniel. The courts, the press, and his own arrogance took care of that. Revenge was about restoring what mattered: truth, dignity, and the bond between a father and his daughter. As the stars blinked awake above us, I looked at my granddaughter chasing fireflies in the yard, my daughter finally free from her chains, and I thought, he tried to erase me, but I am still here, and so is my family.